Hi guys, sorry I'm gone today. A lot of you knew I was going to be out finally taking my sick girls to the doctor. So I'm going to kind of walk you through what we would be doing today if I was here. So listen, I'll try to do this quickly so I can leave you as much possible work time as I can. I just have some quotes up on the board for you to think about when you're choosing, how you treat our guest teacher today. The precepts from the movie Wonder reminded me of this. And remember that how you treat people is ultimately what says what kind of person you are. So treat our guest teacher with um, a lot of kindness. Okay, so looking at our data from the lab, you only have part of this data. I want to kind of fill it in together, and you can choose to use my data or use your own. The data I'm going to give you might be a little bit more helpful. I'm going to base it on what either I measured or what the chemical melting point of the substances that we used were. So for fat, the melting point of fat, and I'm only going to fill in this middle melting point column because that should be the only one we need to use. So the chemical melting point of fat is about 34 degrees. Um, and I'll just put a C rather than spend time getting the degree symbol in there, but about 34 degrees Celsius. So because fat's a substance, it'll have the same melting point. So you should have seen that no matter how much fat you had, that it should have melted around the same temperature. Obviously, the 2 inches would take more time because there was more of it, so it takes longer to melt, but the temperature should have remained the same. And this was about what we found on average as a class. So we weren't far off looking at your data from yesterday. Then for soap, soap was a little bit trickier because the melting point of soap is about 82 degrees. And a lot of you knew that I knew that because I was kind of coming around and saying, okay, guys, pay attention, you're getting close. And I knew about when the soap would melt. Now, because the melting point of soap is so high, a lot of you didn't actually even get to see it melt, and that's okay. Just kind of is what it is when you have a high melting point and you're using a water bath and water only gets to 100 degrees Celsius. It's just the way it goes. So there's your data. And you're going to be using that data to answer the questions at the bottom of the page. So if we look at those questions at the bottom of the page, here are the two questions. First, imagine someone who thinks the two white materials are the same because they both look the same. How could you argue that they are different substances? So the two white materials that they're talking about are fat and soap. And then the next question is, how does the amount of a substance affect its melting point? Write an explanation below. Use your data as evidence. Um, Both these questions are actually intended to be answered with a CER. I'm going to answer question 2, and then you're going to answer question 1. I'm going to answer question 2 really quickly, just to give you a sample. Then you're going to answer question 1. Then when you're finished, you're going to give yourself a grade. And I'll explain how that's going to work. If you don't have enough space, you can use the space below question 2, because like I said, I'm just going to answer question 2. You don't have to write as I'm writing. I just want you to listen. Then you're going to answer question 1. You can also use this white space up here, but you should, if you're answering this well, you should definitely need more space than just this. So then, before we answer, I want to talk about scientific principles. But the two scientific principles that are kind of important here both involve properties. And so I took the scientific principle that you guys have in your binder and I broke it into 2 parts. First, it's that properties can be used to tell substances apart. And second, it's that the properties are the same no matter the size of the substance. So if I have 1 inch of fat or 2 inches of fat, the properties should be the same because they're the same substance. It doesn't matter how much I have. And here, this says that 2 different substances should have different properties because they're not the same thing. And we use those properties to tell them apart. So I kind of took that one principle and broke it into 2 parts, and I'm going to use only one of the parts in my writing. The other part you can use. So however you choose to write that scientific principle, that's what you need to include in your reasoning. Okay, so on to the next page. Here is the question I'm going to answer. How does the amount of a substance affect its melting point? Write an explanation below. Use your data as evidence. So I'm going to color code my writing just because I always do. And I'll write my claim in red. And I'm going to say the amount of a substance does not affect its melting point. Now I need to include data in as evidence. So the data that I'm going to use, because I'm talking about the amount of a substance, I'm only going to pick the data that's actually evidence to answer this claim. And so the only data that's evidence is the data that both samples of fat melted at 34 degrees and both samples of soap melted at 82 degrees. And I'm actually just going to pick one. I'm probably just going to stick with the soap because, the fat, because it just makes a little more sense to me because that was the one that most of us actually got to melt. So I'll stick with that. And I'll use my transition. The evidence for this is that 1 inch of fat and 2 inches of fat both melt at 34 degrees Celsius. And if you can't figure out the degrees symbol, just write Celsius. That's totally fine. Or just write degrees, I mean. That's totally fine. So that's enough evidence. I really only have one piece of evidence. If I wanted to do a better job and include more evidence, I could include the data about the soap, but I'm not really sure about that soap data, so I'm just going to stick with what I'm sure about. And then next I need to include my reasoning. And if we go back and look at those two scientific principles, I'm going to use this one because I'm talking about how they melt at the same temperature. So I'm not talking about telling things apart. I'm saying that no matter what, the properties are the same because they help us tell what matter is. So then going back to my writing, I'm going to say, and I need to be sure to explain, like to connect my reasoning to my claim. And I'm going to do sort of exactly what we did before with solubility. And I'm going to say, this is because melting point is a property of matter and will stay the same no matter the amount of a substance. Okay, I am done. So this is a short explanation, but that's okay. We're getting to the point now where when we only have one piece of evidence and we don't have a ton of data, we're just doing a really good job answering a question with a claim, supporting it with evidence, and then explaining the science behind it. So this is fine. So then you are going to, at the end, give yourself a grade. So if you turn to the page in the front of your binder where the grades are, this is the first one we did. So you're not going to get a grade on 21 number 2. If you would like, you can give mine a grade, but you don't need to grade your own. You're going to look down at 21 number 1, and once you've finished writing, I want you to go through and read every single one of these statements and decide if that's something you did in your writing. Did you clearly state your claim, or did you clearly state your claim in the opening and the closing? Or is your claim unclear? You're going to go through and give yourself a grade and be honest. If this is something you're struggling with and you feel like you're getting a 2, give yourself a 2. Don't give yourself a 3, because then if I give you a 2, we're going to have to figure out what you're not understanding about this process. So be honest about your grade, do your best, and then you're going to fill your grade in right here. That's going to be a self-score. And then when I grade your work, I will put a grade right here, and I'll highlight the statements that I think you missed or that I think you need to work on. And then you can go back and update it and you'll get a corrected grade. For today, you're just going to give yourself a score and write it here. So remember what you're going to do. answer question 1 on page 21. You can choose to use the data that we filled in together. Then once you're finished, you're going to find this rubric in the front of your notebook and you're going to give yourself a grade. Once you've given yourself a grade, you can close your notebook and have free time on Google Classroom. I posted those Bill Nye videos. There's a melting point video from yesterday. You choose, but it needs to be school appropriate and it needs to be links that you find on Classroom. All right, guys, have a great day. Work hard. Remember, do your best on answering question 1, and I will see you tomorrow. And tomorrow we have a lab, so make sure you're ready by finishing this assignment. All right, have a great day.